The Zephyrian Empire had always prided itself on being the galaxy's premier collectors of biological curiosities. Not in the crude, barbaric sense that lesser civilizations might understand. Oh no, theirs was a refined art of scientific acquisition. Their research vessels glided through space with the same elegant arrogance of a wine connoisseur sampling vintages, occasionally plucking interesting specimens from backwater worlds for the advancement of galactic knowledge. Or so they told themselves during their lengthy ethics committee meetings. Dr. Vexton adjusted his seven-fingered grip on the datapad, his translucent purple skin shimmering with satisfaction as he reviewed the latest acquisition. The research facility on Kepler 442c hummed with a quiet efficiency that only came from centuries of perfected methodology. Every surface gleamed with antiseptic precision, every instrument calibrated to 17 decimal places, every containment protocol tested against the galaxy's most dangerous life forms. The Zephyrians had turned abduction into an art form, though they preferred the term scientific collection in their official reports. Specimen designation Terra 3847 shows remarkable resilience, Vexton announced to his research team, his voice carrying that particular tone of academic smugness that would make university professors across the galaxy weep with envy. The creature has maintained consciousness stability despite optimal sedation protocols. Fascinating primitive neural architecture. The other researchers, a collection of beings whose names contained more apostrophes than a Welsh village sign, clustered around the observation screen. Through reinforced transparent aluminum, they watched their latest prize, a bipedal creature from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star, currently secured to their most advanced containment platform with molecular-level restraints. The being appeared deceptively simple. 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head. The usual appendages arranged in the boringly symmetrical pattern that seemed popular among carbon-based life forms. The muscular structure is surprisingly efficient, noted Dr. K.Y.L. Veth, whose doctoral thesis on primitive locomotion had earned him tenure at the Galactic Institute of Obviously Superior Sciences. Though clearly designed for a low-gravity environment, the bone density suggests adaptation to what their crude measurements would call 1 standard gravity. How charmingly rustic. What none of these enlightened beings bothered to consider, as they congratulated themselves on their clinical objectivity, was that their primitive specimen had been awake for the past 4 to 7 minutes, systematically cataloging every detail of his surroundings with the methodical precision of someone who had spent years expecting exactly this sort of situation. Military training had its perks, and Marcus Kane had always been the type to read the fine print on his worst-case scenarios. The restraints were impressively engineered, he had to admit. Some sort of energy field that responded to resistance with proportional counterforce. Elegant, really. The monitoring equipment bristled with sensors that would make NASA engineers weep with envy. The laboratory itself spoke of a civilization that had turned scientific method into high art. Unfortunately for his captors, Marcus had learned long ago that the more sophisticated the system, the more spectacular its failure when approached from an unexpected angle. He kept his breathing steady, his heart rate controlled, as his captors discussed his physiology with the casual detachment of wine critics debating vintage. Through years of training and more than a few unpleasant experiences with hostile forces, Marcus had developed what his commanding officers politely termed an unhealthy talent for improvisation. His friends called it Kane's laws of creative destruction. His enemies, when they were still capable of speech, usually called it something considerably less printable. Cognitive patterns appear remarkably simplistic, Vexton continued, oblivious to the fact that his subject was currently performing a detailed structural analysis of the laboratory's support systems. Neural activity suggests basic pattern recognition, but nothing approaching true intelligence. The species appears to rely on crude instinctual responses rather than logical reasoning. Marcus almost smiled at that. If there was one thing he'd learned during his 20 years of service, it was that the most dangerous assumption you could make about your enemy was that they were stupid. He'd seen entire armies defeated by that particular brand of arrogance. The fact that his captors had apparently mastered interstellar travel while maintaining the strategic awareness of a houseplant was, well, it was about to become their problem. "Shall we begin the neurological mapping?" asked Dr. Zilfek, whose enthusiasm for brain probing had earned her the nickname the vivisector among her colleagues. "I'm particularly interested in the primitive emotional centers." The way these creatures process fear should provide fascinating insights into evolutionary psychology. Proceed, Vexton agreed. Begin with basic stimulus response testing. Let's see how this specimen reacts to controlled stress. The first probe descended toward Marcus's skull with the clinical precision of a Swiss watchmaker. This was the moment his captors expected to see primitive panic, the thrashing and screaming that had characterized their previous subjects from less evolved worlds. Instead, Marcus opened his eyes and spoke in perfectly clear Galactic standard. You know, I hate to interrupt what I'm sure is a very important scientific procedure, but I couldn't help noticing that your containment system has some interesting design flaws. The silence that followed could have been measured with atomic clocks. 7 alien faces turned toward their supposedly unconscious subject with expressions that managed to convey surprise, confusion, and the dawning realization that perhaps their assumptions about primitive neural capacity might need some revision. The specimen appears to have developed linguistic capabilities, Vexton observed, his voice carrying the tone of someone trying very hard to maintain scientific objectivity while his worldview underwent rapid structural collapse. Oh, I've had linguistic capabilities for years, Marcus replied conversationally. Along with pattern recognition, logical reasoning, and what you might call an unhealthy curiosity about alien technology. Speaking of which, that neuroprobe you're pointing at my head, is that what you used on the last few species you collected? How did you, Dr. Kylveth began, learn your language? Simple pattern recognition. Your species uses verbal communication, your equipment responds to voice commands, and you've been chattering away for the better part of an hour. Honestly, for a civilization advanced enough to build all this impressive hardware, your operational security is remarkably amateur. Marcus shifted slightly, testing the restraints. The energy field responded exactly as he'd expected, proportional resistance, but with a curious lag time that suggested the system was designed for strength-based escape attempts rather than other approaches. But here's what really interests me, he continued, his tone taking on the casual quality of someone discussing the weather. You've obviously done this before. Multiple species, probably hundreds of specimens over the years. All those brain scans, all that neurological data. Tell me, what happened to your previous subjects once you were done studying them? The aliens exchanged glances that wouldn't have looked out of place at a tax audit. Dr. Zilfek cleared her throat, or the alien equivalent, which sounded like a deflating balloon. The specimens were relocated to appropriate habitats for continued observation. Relocated. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. That's a nice euphemism. Very clinical. I bet it looks great in your ethics committee reports. Subject relocated to appropriate habitat for continued observation. Much better than subject terminated and disposed of through standard biological waste protocols, don't you think? The silence stretched longer this time. Marcus could practically hear the gears turning in their superior alien brains as they processed the uncomfortable realization that their specimen was not only conscious and intelligent, but appeared to have deduced several centuries' worth of carefully classified research protocols. Your assumptions about our procedures, Vexton began. Accurate. Marcus interrupted. I'm afraid they are. You see, the thing about being human is that we're remarkably good at reading between the lines. Call it survival instinct, call it pattern recognition, call it whatever makes you feel better about your research methodology. But when someone starts talking about appropriate habitats and continued observation while pointing brain probes at your head, the implications tend to be fairly obvious. He tested the restraints again, this time with a slight rotational movement that the system wasn't quite prepared for. The energy field flickered, just for a millisecond, but long enough for someone with the right training to notice. But enough about my impending relocation to an appropriate habitat, Marcus continued. Let's talk about something more interesting, like the structural integrity of this facility. Beautiful design, by the way. Very sophisticated. All those support systems, all that redundant engineering, must have taken centuries to perfect. The facility is constructed to withstand any conceivable threat, Dr. Kylveth said, his pride overriding his growing concern about their increasingly talkative specimen. Any conceivable threat, Marcus repeated thoughtfully. That's the problem with conceivable threats, though they are limited by your ability to conceive them. And based on our conversation so far, your species seems to have a fairly narrow imagination when it comes to potential problems. The restraint system gave another micro-flicker as Marcus continued his apparently random movements. He was mapping the system's response patterns now, cataloging weaknesses with the same methodical precision his captors had used to study him. The irony wasn't lost on him. They were all conducting behavioral analysis, just not in the direction the aliens had intended. For instance, Marcus went on, your containment system is brilliantly designed to prevent escape through brute force. All that proportional resistance, those molecular-level bonds, very impressive. But it's not particularly well adapted to dealing with subjects who understand the engineering principles behind the technology. Impossible, Vexton snapped, his scientific composure finally beginning to crack. Your species hasn't even achieved faster-than-light travel. Your understanding of advanced physics is centuries behind our most basic principles. True, Marcus agreed cheerfully. But you know what we do understand. Mechanical engineering. Stress points. System vulnerabilities. The kind of practical knowledge that comes from spending generations building things, breaking things, and figuring out how to fix them again with whatever happens to be lying around. Another flicker from the restraints, longer this time. Marcus was close now, very close to finding the resonance frequency that would turn the alien's sophisticated containment system into an expensive light show. Take this facility, for example. Magnificent construction, obviously designed by beings with a profound understanding of materials science and structural engineering. But I've been lying here for nearly an hour, listening to the harmonics in your support systems, and I couldn't help but notice that the primary load-bearing elements are tuned to a very specific frequency range. The alien scientists exchanged worried glances. Dr. Zilthek moved toward the containment controls, but Marcus's next words stopped her in her tracks. I wouldn't touch those controls if I were you. See, the beautiful thing about harmonics is that once you understand the system's resonant frequency, you can either work with it or against it. And right about now. The restraint field collapsed with a sound like breaking glass. Marcus rolled off the examination table in one fluid motion, his military training taking over as he assessed his immediate tactical situation. 7 surprised aliens, multiple egress points, and a laboratory full of sophisticated equipment that had just become his personal arsenal. Now that's what I call stress testing, he announced, grabbing the neural probe that had been threatening his skull moments earlier. Let's see how well your behavioral analysis holds up when the subject starts analyzing back. The first alien to react was Dr. Kyl Veth, who lunged for what appeared to be an alarm control. Marcus intercepted him with the neural probe, which turned out to make an excellent improvised cattle prod when applied to alien nervous systems. The doctor collapsed with a sound that suggested his species' pain responses were remarkably similar to those of Earth mammals. Fascinating neurological reaction, Marcus observed, channeling his inner research scientist as chaos erupted around him. Subject displays immediate motor function disruption when exposed to precisely calibrated neural stimulation. I wonder what other physiological responses we might discover. The laboratory erupted into pandemonium as the remaining aliens scrambled for exits, alarm systems, and anything that might restore their previous comfortable position as observers rather than subjects. Marcus, meanwhile, was having the time of his life discovering just how creatively alien technology could be repurposed by someone with the right combination of desperation and engineering intuition. The molecular scanner became a directed energy weapon when its beam focus was adjusted beyond manufacturer specifications. The environmental controls, when overridden through what Marcus liked to think of as aggressive user interface modification, turned the laboratory's atmospheric system into something resembling a hurricane simulator. The gravity manipulation system, well, that was just plain fun once you figured out how to reverse its polarity. This is really quite educational, Marcus called out over the sound of expensive scientific equipment being repurposed into instruments of creative destruction. I'm learning so much about alien engineering principles. Did you know that your artificial gravity generators have absolutely no safeguards against recursive feedback loops? Very trusting design philosophy. Dr. Vexton, who had taken shelter behind what had formerly been a precision measurement device and was now functioning as abstract art, managed to activate the facility's emergency communication system. Security breach in Laboratory 7. He gasped into the communicator. The specimen has escaped containment and is demonstrating hostile capabilities far beyond projected parameters. Hostile. Marcus paused in his creative deconstruction of a particle analyzer to look genuinely hurt. I prefer enthusiastically interactive. After all, this is just another form of scientific inquiry, isn't it? I'm studying your technology. You're studying my behavioral responses to stress. It's very collaborative when you think about it. The security response team that burst through the laboratory doors 30 seconds later was clearly prepared for a variety of contingencies. Unfortunately, none of those contingencies had included facing a human who had turned their own research facility into a weapons laboratory and appeared to be enjoying himself immensely in the process. Marcus greeted them with a modified atmospheric processor that fired concentrated bursts of various gases at precisely the wrong pressure for alien respiratory systems. The security team's sophisticated combat armor was excellently designed to handle energy weapons, projectile impacts, and even limited exposure to vacuum. It was considerably less effective against an opponent who had figured out how to weaponize the facility's climate control system. You know what the real problem is with being a superior galactic civilization? Marcus asked conversationally as he systematically dismantled the security team's tactical formation using nothing but cleverly redirected laboratory equipment. You start thinking that superior technology automatically means superior tactics. But technology is just tools, and tools are only as effective as the person using them. He paused to recalibrate what had previously been a biological sample preservation unit and was now functioning as a very effective area denial system. Take your containment protocols, for example. Beautifully engineered, probably tested against every conceivable escape scenario your computers could simulate. But all that testing was based on your assumptions about how intelligent beings would attempt to escape. You never considered that someone might approach the problem from the opposite direction. The security team's commanding officer, distinguished by having more elaborate armor and a slightly different shade of purple skin, managed to raise his weapon despite the ongoing atmospheric chaos. Surrender immediately, or face termination. Termination, Marcus repeated thoughtfully. There's that word again. Very popular concept around here, isn't it? But here's the thing about termination. It's only effective if you can actually achieve it. He triggered another of his improvised devices, and the security team discovered that their sophisticated energy weapons were surprisingly vulnerable to localized electromagnetic interference generated by creatively overloading alien scientific equipment. The real tragedy here, Marcus continued, working his way methodically through the facility's defensive systems while maintaining what his former drill sergeants would have recognized as a running tactical commentary, is that this could have been a much more civilized interaction. You could have tried diplomacy, cultural exchange, maybe even just asking permission before the whole abduction and vivisection routine. The laboratory's main power systems were beginning to show signs of strain under the creative load demands Marcus was placing on them. Warning lights flashed in colors that probably meant something urgent in Zephyrian, and automated systems began announcing alerts in several galactic languages. But no, Marcus went on, ducking under a blast from one of the security team's backup weapons, while simultaneously rewiring what appeared to be a quantum measurement device into something considerably more aggressive. You had to go with the whole primitive specimen approach. Very efficient, I'm sure, right up until your specimen started demonstrating postgraduate level creativity in applied chaos theory. The facility's structural integrity warnings were becoming increasingly urgent. Marcus had discovered that alien construction materials, while incredibly strong and sophisticated, shared one crucial weakness with their human equivalents. They were designed to operate within specific parameters, and those parameters could be enthusiastically exceeded by someone with sufficient motivation and a complete disregard for manufacturer warranties. Attention all personnel. The facility's AI announced in the sort of calm, professional tone that computers used when everything was going catastrophically wrong. Structural integrity compromised in sections 7 through 12. Initiating emergency evacuation protocols. Emergency evacuation, Marcus mused, pausing in his systematic deconstruction of the facility's defense systems. That sounds like an excellent idea. I should probably be going myself, places to see, people to not be vivisected by. The shuttle bay was, predictably, located through a series of corridors designed with the sort of logical efficiency that advanced civilizations seem to favor. Unfortunately for the Zephyrians, logical efficiency made for predictable traffic patterns, and Marcus had spent enough time studying their facility layout to anticipate exactly where the evacuation routes would bottleneck. The aliens who had spent years perfecting the art of specimen collection discovered that being specimens themselves required a completely different skill set. Marcus herded them through their own corridors with the casual efficiency of someone who had spent years managing tactical situations, using their own security systems against them, and generally demonstrating that the line between hunter and hunted was considerably more flexible than they had assumed. The really amusing part, Marcus observed to Dr. Vexton, who had somehow ended up serving as an involuntary guide to the shuttle bay, is that this whole situation could have been avoided if you'd just done a proper threat assessment on human behavior patterns. We're actually quite reasonable when approached diplomatically. Your species is documented as primitive and aggressive, Vexton protested, stumbling along corridors that were rapidly filling with emergency lighting and the sound of structural systems failing in creative ways. Aggressive, maybe, Marcus conceded. But primitive? We've been managing complex technological systems for centuries. We've been solving engineering problems under pressure since we figured out how to make fire. And we've been turning our enemies' advantages against them since the first human realized that a bigger rock could be used for something other than paperweight duty. The shuttle bay doors opened to reveal exactly what Marcus had hoped to find, a selection of Zephyrian transport vessels, each one representing centuries of advanced engineering and completely unguarded, because who would be insane enough to steal an alien spacecraft? The answer to that question, Marcus announced to the universe in general, would be someone who just spent the last hour getting a crash course in Zephyrian technology, courtesy of your excellent research facility. The shuttle he selected was, according to the control panel readings he was rapidly learning to interpret, capable of faster-than-light travel, equipped with advanced navigation systems, and powered by what appeared to be a small artificial star. It was also, he discovered with the sort of professional satisfaction that came from a job well done, surprisingly intuitive to operate for someone with the right combination of mechanical aptitude and complete disregard for proper procedures. Wait, Dr. Vexton called out as Marcus began what could generously be called a pre-flight check, and more accurately described as creative button-pushing. You can't simply steal one of our vessels. You don't understand the navigation systems, the safety protocols. Safety protocols, Marcus repeated, powering up systems that filled the shuttle bay with a sort of energetic humming that suggested impressive amounts of barely contained power. You know what would have been a good safety protocol? Not kidnapping members of species you haven't properly researched. The shuttle's engines came online with a sound like controlled thunder. Marcus waved goodbye to his former captors through the cockpit window, his expression carrying the sort of cheerful malevolence that had made him legendary among hostile forces back on Earth. But don't worry, he called out over the shuttle's communication system as he prepared for what would charitably be called an unconventional departure. I'm sure your insurance will cover most of the structural damage. And look on the bright side, you've learned valuable lessons about specimen containment, facility security, and the importance of thorough behavioral analysis. The shuttle bay doors, not surprisingly, were designed to open slowly and majestically, in keeping with the Zephyrians' appreciation for dramatic efficiency. Marcus, whose appreciation ran more toward immediate tactical advantage, discovered that the door controls responded quite well to creative overriding. The explosion that followed as he departed the facility was visible from orbit, a brilliant flower of energy and debris that had formerly been the galaxy's most sophisticated research station. The Zephyrian emergency response teams, arriving just in time to watch their centuries of accumulated scientific knowledge become an expanding cloud of very expensive particles, would later describe the incident in terms that their insurance investigators found difficult to classify. Marcus, meanwhile, was discovering that stolen alien spacecraft handled remarkably well once you got the hang of the control systems. The navigation computer was helpfully suggesting several possible destinations, including what appeared to be the coordinates for Earth. The weapon systems, because of course a research vessel would be armed, were responding to his commands with the sort of eager cooperation that suggested they had been designed by engineers who understood the importance of user-friendly interfaces. 3 days later, Dr. Vexton was still filling out incident reports from the temporary research station that had been hastily established in a more secure location. His superiors at the Galactic Institute were asking uncomfortable questions about resource allocation, security protocols, and the wisdom of continuing their specimen collection program without more thorough preliminary studies. Subject demonstrated capabilities far exceeding initial projections, he wrote for the 15th time, trying to find diplomatic language for our supposedly primitive specimen systematically destroyed our most advanced facility using our own equipment and then stole one of our fastest ships. The final insult had come 12 hours after the escape, when monitoring stations throughout the sector had detected a transmission from the stolen vessel, a message broadcast on all standard frequencies, translated into 17 galactic languages, and accompanied by what could only be described as cheerfully aggressive music. Greetings from the primitive species of Sol 3, the message had begun. We'd like to thank the Zephyrian Empire for the educational opportunity and the loan of one of their research vessels. Consider this a formal notice that we'll be conducting our own study of galactic civilizations, using research methods based on voluntary participation and informed consent. The message had gone on to provide detailed technical specifications for several of the weapon systems Marcus had improvised during his escape, along with what appeared to be instructional materials for turning standard research equipment into tactical assets. The final section contained coordinates for Earth, an open invitation for diplomatic contact, and a polite but firm warning about the consequences of approaching human-controlled space with anything resembling hostile intent. Furthermore, the message concluded, we should point out that Subject Terra 3847 was actually a fairly representative example of human problem-solving capabilities under stress. We have approximately 7 billion more individuals with similar skill sets, most of whom have had considerably more training in creative applications of technology. The message ended with what sounded suspiciously like human laughter. Dr. Vexton set down his stylus and stared at the incident report he would never quite manage to complete. Somewhere in the depths of space, their former specimen was presumably conducting his own research program with all the enthusiasm of someone who had discovered that the galaxy was full of advanced technology just waiting to be creatively repurposed. The Zephyrian Empire, meanwhile, was quietly revising their specimen collection protocols and trying very hard not to think about what might happen if the humans decided to return the favor. As it turned out, being the subjects of scientific inquiry was considerably less comfortable than being the ones conducting the research. And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, Marcus Kane was learning to fly an alien spacecraft and wondering what other interesting civilizations might benefit from a human perspective on scientific methodology. The galaxy, he reflected, was about to become a much more interesting place. After all, turnabout was fair play, and humans had always been remarkably good at learning from their mistakes.